So whenever we're using the math class or even the number format class, we're introduced to static methods. There's also a static method on the string class, which is format. So we can create a static method in our account class, or we could even create a static method in our driver class. A static method means that you do not need an instance of an object in order to invoke that method. So if you look at our driver class, our main method is static. So that means we don't need an instance of transactions in order to invoke our main method. I can create an additional static method on my driver class. So what I'm going to do is make a static method that is going to print account information. Okay, so I made a static method on my transaction driver class called accounts output. It accepts 3 account objects. It's going to take those account objects and it's going to print them out to the console. And I did make 2 horizontal lines so that it puts a line between each account. Now, when I invoke this method, I invoke it through my main method. So right here is where I'm invoking the method and I'm passing in my 3 account objects. Those 3 account objects are being passed into this method, and wherever A1, A2, and A3 is at, that's the location of where you passed in those account objects. So A1 will be printed out first, A2 would be printed out second, A3 would be printed out third. Now I can change the order, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to go ahead and compile and run, and then I'll go ahead and change the order. And here's my output. So here's account 1, here's account 2, and here's account 3. Now, like I said, it doesn't matter what the order is. The first one that gets passed into this method is going to be printed first. So if I pass in account 3 first and account 1 last, then account 3 will be printed out first. It doesn't matter what these variables say. These are just temporary variables that are just used locally within the static method. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and run. And here's my result. You can see that account 3 was printed out first. I could even do something like print out account 3 times if I wanted to. And here's me printing out account 3 times. So as long as I pass in 3 account objects, then I can invoke this method here. It's a static method, meaning I don't need an instance of the transaction class in order to invoke that method. Now, since I'm invoking this method from my transaction class, I don't need to use the class name in order to invoke it. But let's just say for some reason I wanted to invoke the transaction method from the account class. I'm going to need to use the transaction class name, and then I can use the method name. Now, since this is public, that means account is going to have access to this method. So I created this method on the account class where I invoke the accounts output object from the transaction class. This method is static, so I don't need an instance of the transaction class in order to invoke this method. Now, this method does need to have 3 account objects passed to it. So in order to get 3 account objects, I had to instantiate 2 account objects right here. So I'm making new account objects that I'm passing into this method. This keyword refers to the current instance of the object. So whatever object the test method is being invoked on, that is the object that's going to be passed into this method. This just references the current instance of the object. So here in my transaction class, if I were to comment out this line and compile and run, I would have no output. So if I want output, I need to invoke the method test from the account class because that's the method where I'm actually calling the account's output now. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So in account 1, I'm invoking the method test. When this method gets invoked, Java's going to hop over here and look at this method. It's going to see that we're calling the static method on the transaction class called accounts output, and it's going to accept 3 account parameters. So the first account object is going to be the current instance of this object, which is referenced by the this. So what they mean by this is account 1. So account 1 is represented by this inside of this class. And then I'm instantiating 2 new account objects and I'm passing that to my accounts output. So when I hop back over here and I compile and run, here are my results. There's my Bob object, my Tim object, and there's a Ted Murphy object, which was referenced by account 1. But it got a reference by the this keyword inside of my class. So I was able to invoke this static method through the class name of transactions. And all I needed to do is pass in 3 account objects. But I just wanted to demonstrate, as long as you have a static method that's public, it can be referenced by another class. So I was able to do that here, even though that method lives on this class here. So whenever you create static methods, it makes more sense to create static methods that are related to the class that they're in. So if I wanted to create a static method that is going to do something with accounts, it should be declared within the account class. So let's just say I wanted to create a static method that is going to zero the balance in the account number for all account objects that we pass to it. So I'm going to go ahead and create that method within my account class. So here's a static method that I created. I use static. It returns nothing, right? So return void. And I name the method reset. You're going to pass in an account object. So whenever you pass in the account object, I'm simply going to set the name to be blank, the account number to be 0, and the balance to be 0. So it's like I'm resetting that account completely. Now, because this method is within the account class, I don't need to use a getter or setter because this reset method has direct access to this instance data. So that means by having the reset method within this account class, I'm able to directly access the instance data of the account that's being passed in. So I'm going to go ahead and test the static method that I just created. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and compile and run so that we can look at our current results. So here are the 3 objects I created. So I'm going to compile and run. And here are my results. So let's call the reset method on one of these accounts. All right, so I added these 3 lines of code. So I'm making an output statement. I'm just announcing that I'm going to reset. Then I call the static method reset on my account class. Now, this is a static method, so I don't need to go through an instance of an object. I can go straight through the class name, and I pass in account 1. Account 1 is going to get reset because it's going to have its name set to blank, account number set to 0, and balance set to 0. Then I'm re-outputting all my account objects by calling this static method on my transaction class, which is simply just going to output my account objects to the console. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and run. And here are my results. So initially, this is what I had for Ted Murphy. His account got reset, but all the other ones stayed the same. If I wanted to reset the other accounts, I would have to invoke the reset method on those account objects. So I'm resetting account 2 and 3. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and run. And here are my results. Here are those 3 objects, and here are the 3 objects after they've been reset. So that's how static methods are used. They're not associated with the instance of the object. They're associated with the class. So in order to use them, you can just go straight through the class name. And as long as they're declared with public visibility, then they can be used by another class.